So one of the things that I have observed in arts marketing is how much has changed since I started in the 90s. It seems to be changing all the time, particularly in the digital marketing field. And one of the things I think that has felt reassuringly constant is probably a few of the skills, such as copywriting. And that's what we're going to tackle in today's webinar. HDK have the opportunity to work with some of our clients when we build websites and we write copy for them for their websites. So, for example, we're working with a chain of theatres at the moment, and we're helping them write the copy for their websites. We did the William Morris Gallery quite recently, and so today what we want to do is share some of the experience that we have garnered over the years of creating copy for websites, share those with you. There's a lot of you here already today, so I'm sure there's some great experience in the room, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, and we've got a discussion point later on. We're expecting quite a few people today, so I'm going to give a few more moments for latecomers to arrive before we start. What I'd love to happen first, and we want to keep this interactive in certain elements, is for you to introduce yourself in the chat box. So find the chat box, enter your name and where you're from, and maybe something about what brought you to this webinar, why it's relevant to you, or what experience you've got on this topic. We'd love to hear it. Gives us some great feedback and that we can use in the webinar. I'm going to go quiet for another minute just to give you a chance to put your answers in the chat box. When I see quite a few coming through, then we'll carry on with this webinar. So yeah, if you can add your name, where you're from, and just something about why this topic is relevant to you. Morning, Joe. Thanks for being the first one. Right, you're all quick off the mark today. That's impressive. Expect to see some familiar faces here today and some new faces as well. So hi, Kate. Right, please continue adding your intros if you haven't quite finished. If you're not quite as fast as some of those early birds there, I will introduce your speakers for today while you continue doing that. So my name is Hans. I'm director and founder at HDK. I am a male in my mid-50s. I have got cropped, short, dark hair. It's cropped and bald on the top with a trimmed beard and brown eyes, and I'm wearing a green checked shirt today.
Hi, I'm Bella. I'm account manager at HDK. I am a white woman in my mid-20s with curly, dark, short hair, and I'm wearing a greyish top today.
Hi everyone, I'm Fizz and I'm an account executive here at HDK. I'm a white woman in my 20s with long brown hair, which is currently tied up, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt today.
And we've also got Tom joining us. He's going to do a pre-recorded segment later on, talking about SEO and how that works with copywriting for websites. None of us are going to see him, but there's a picture on the screen, and he is a white male, younger than me. He's got short blonde hair, blue eyes, and yeah, I don't know what he's wearing today. And if you are if this is your first time to an HDK webinar, welcome. And particular welcome if we saw you at the AMA conference in Brighton earlier this month and we gave you one of our webinar leaflets. So we're really pleased that you have joined us today. If you didn't pick up from then, or if this is your first time, HDK is a digital marketing agency focused on arts, culture and heritage. We've been around for 20 years now and work with quite wide range of clients. We build websites and we do digital marketing. And particularly today, we've got Bella and Fizz, who are focused on the digital marketing side of our client work as well. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to cover a few things in today's session. As I said, it's about us sharing the experience that we have doing this on a day-to-day basis, particularly around websites for arts, culture and heritage. And we're going to give you a brief introduction to copywriting. We're going to give you places to start when you're researching for your plan for copywriting. We've got Tom, who's going to bring in the SEO element to consider when you're thinking about it. And then we just generally want to share a number of tips and tricks that you can implement, take away, and think about after today's session. And then we're going to have a session on testing that. We've got a little bit of housekeeping and then open up for a discussion. There's a few other elements where if you have a question, put it in the chat box. We'll try and answer it as soon as we can at any point throughout the prepared presentation. We're aiming to finish within the hour. We always try and finish within the hour and leave a few minutes before that for a discussion. And as I said, I suspect there's a lot of experience in the room here today. So I hope that you'll feel free, comfortable to join in with that discussion as well. Right.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hans. So starting with the basics. Firstly, what is copywriting? Copywriting is the act of generating different forms of written content for your audience. Often this is to generate revenue, share valuable information, or encourage potential visitors to take action. Why is it important? There are so many reasons as to why copywriting is important, and it's really key to keep it consistent. Not only does this help to build a strong brand image, but it also helps drive audience engagement, catches attention, and ensures your organization will stand out. So today's webinar, we are focusing on website copywriting. Website copywriting is all about creating informative content that improves user experience, drives readers to take actions, for example, buying theatre tickets, and maximizes traffic to your site via web search, also known as SEO, which Tom will touch on later. When we're in the arts or when you work in the arts, there are some unique challenges. You might struggle to create a tone of voice that is open and friendly, for example, while also being convincing enough to encourage readers to purchase tickets. It's also difficult to maintain consistency across a website where you potentially have to talk about a diverse range of arts projects. And finally, in the arts, we often have a large range of audience personas we might be trying to target. So now I'm going to pass over to Bella, who will talk about where to begin.
Thanks, Fizz. So we're going to start by talking a bit about the strategy and guidelines and really building out that groundwork of before you've even written your first sentence, how do you start thinking about copywriting on your website? At this point, we've already seen a bit in the chat about the reasons why people are joining us today, so that's really great. You might be thinking about revamping your about page, what is best practice when building out an events page, or you might have just done a complete rebrand and remessaging exercise and want to see how to implement that across the whole site. So there's a bit of a range of reasons why you might be wanting to think more about your copywriting. But as with any good marketing strategy, we really like to start off with the basics and that groundwork to lay for the content that follows. So first of all, we always like to think about knowing your audience. And as many arts and culture organizations know, audience will play a really big part of your marketing strategy. Putting effort into marketing is putting effort into your audience. So the first thing we like to think about is who you're speaking to. Thinking about who will be reading your content and why they're doing that can really help to inform what the content is itself instead of the other way around. Your website is often that first digital experience that a user will have of your organization or of your institution. They might have never even visited you in person before. So what is the experience that you want them to have and why, and what are you hoping that they get out of it? It is one of the, writing for these different audiences is one of the, we find trickiest but most important parts of the website, where you really focus on user personas and building out those audience profiles. And there's always, of course, the question of how do you talk at the same time to first-time visitors or versus your loyal audiences who know everything there is about you, or even just explorers who are slightly interested in, say, your dance program or your gallery exhibition, while ensuring that your CEO, your board, or any other important stakeholders are happy to sign off on the content. So it needs a little bit of juggling and maneuvering, but that's what we're great at in arts marketing. There's a really nice slide that a quote from the Wallace Foundation, which I like, about audience engagement in the arts, which says that audience building efforts need to be aligned with an art organization's mission, resources, and work, and that the efforts should focus on removing the particular types of barriers that stand between the organization and specific target audiences. So we're going to talk a bit more about accessibility throughout this presentation, but that's a nice little framework that I like to use. So moving on, I have this little quote that I like to think to myself when looking at copywriting, especially for websites, which is first talk to everyone, then talk to someone. And that's thinking really about what are those pathways and those pages that people will access that everyone will see, and whether they know everything about you or nothing about you. So that might be your homepage, your about page, what's on, or events. And that means that you might want to adopt a bit more of an accessible, friendly, open tone, quite clear and really easy to understand. But then don't be shy to really target those specific audiences that you're wanting to speak to on a deeper level. Say you've got a workshops page targeted to families, you might alter your tone of voice or your language to be a bit more friendly, happy, excitable, or you might have a mission and values page, which might need and require a bit more of that industry-specific language that would be shared and read by industry professionals, partners, and those stakeholders that I mentioned. So here's a little exercise or example of how that comes into play in real life. This is the Tate website, which of course gets sort of millions of visitors each year. So it might be different to how a smaller arts organization runs their site, but I think the core principles really still apply. I'll give you a moment to read both of these bits of copy. And what's interesting is these are both sat within the learning and engagement sections of the Tate website, but you can really see the difference in language. So the first is obviously targeted to families and young children. You've got the playful exclamation marks, so they're being a bit more playful with punctuation. It's a bit more conversational, and it's positioning themselves as accessible. It's okay to make noise. Whereas that second example is based on the Tate Research Center. So of course, it's a much more academic style of language and those terms that might not be quite as suited to families. So those are quite clear cut, but I find it really interesting because they are sat within that same section under learning. But often it might not be quite so obvious the different tones of voice or the language that you might want to adopt for different audiences. So one short and interesting exercise that you can do is a bit of peer analysis, and which is looking at maybe other competitors or peers in your sector, finding those interesting websites and pages that stand out to you, thinking about how they use language, who they're talking to, what content do they prioritize, and how might you be able to bring that into your own website. Or the other way around, you might find that maybe that something they do wouldn't work quite so well on your website. So it's nice to keep that in mind. Finally, we'll talk a bit about the structure that we use when working with clients to build out some copy guidelines. So you've thought about your audiences, you've thought about the pathways they might take. Here's a little structure that you could use to take away and create some guidelines for yourself. So first of all, imagining your user personas and audience profiles, and these can be really specific, detailed. Imagine who they are, their demographics, interests, and the reason they're using your site. For example, you might be talking specifically to an undergraduate fine art student who's reading through your site for research on an essay, Or it might be someone who lives locally and they want to potter around your gallery some now and then on a weekend. Those two personas might have a different way of speaking. You might have a different way of speaking to each of them. Tone of voice, which I'm sure a lot of you know about already, but which adjectives describe your organization or institution? If, for example, your organization was a person and was at a party, how might they interact with people? What might they be saying? You can take a look at key fundamentals and accessibility, such as keeping your copy succinct and adding alt text, which Fiz will go on to in more detail later on when we get into the section on actually writing a copy. And then you can create a checklist for yourself with the really key points that you want to hit on each page. Who is this for? Why is this content important? What is the call to action, etc. And then you can offer some examples to help yourself in the future. So maybe you have a bit of copy on your website that you want to rework a little bit. You might want to add that first example and then the reworked version and add some notes for yourself on why you've made those changes, just to be able to refer back to in the future. So now with all of that in mind, we've got a little poll that we'd love for everyone to fill out. It's a bit of a way for us to understand what the practices usually are like in the sector when it comes to website copywriting. So I'm just going to put this poll on the screen for you now. So we'll leave you around a minute just to read through that and answer. Great, thank you all. We've got a really interesting mix of answers here. So I'm not quite sure what I was expecting, but it's quite evenly distributed. So that's really interesting. I'll pause that poll and share that with you now. And we'll also be sharing a bit more information about the poll and what those responses were in a few days on our social media. So thank you, everyone. That's really nice to see. And now I'll pass on to our remote correspondent, Tom, who will be talking about SEO and how you can implement that in your website copywriting.
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm very sorry that I can't be live with you today. I'm still very pleased to have the opportunity to share some brief SEO copywriting tips with you. And the first of these tips is probably the most important one, and that's user first, SEO second. So don't overthink the SEO aspects of copywriting. What's good for users is generally good for SEO and vice versa. So create copy that feels right for your audience. Write to your users, write to your target personas. Don't write to the search engines. Make the copy as easy as possible for users to read, and think about mobile as well. So wherever appropriate, try to use plain English, use relatively short sentences and paragraphs, and break up the copy. Use images, videos, bullet points, quotes, etc. What might look fine on desktop doesn't necessarily translate to reading easily on mobile. So think about that user audience, because they're probably quite a significant percentage of your overall users. Now, Google reads sites in a very, very different way than we do. Therefore, one practical tip is to help Google to understand the page's structure. So each page should have one heading, one main heading, an H1. So in this example, exercising at home. The page can then have multiple H2s, in fact, as many H2s as you would like. In this example, we have two H2s, strength exercises you can do at home, cardio exercises you can do at home. And then H3s are the subordinates, in other words, the subsections of the H2. So in this case, for strength exercises, we have press-ups and sit-ups. For cardio exercises, we have squat jumps and mountain climbers. So you can help Google to understand the structure of your content by using H1s, and there should only ever be one H1, H2s, H3s, and even H4s correctly. Often these are used incorrectly and therefore can confuse Google about the structure of your page. And if you'd like to take a look at an existing page to understand whether you've got the structure right or not, you can Google Ahrefs SEO Toolbar, which is a really handy free plugin that shows you lots of insights with regards to SEO, but one of the tabs just breaks down the H1s, the H2s, etc. on your page. So again, a really nice, quick and easy way to analyze your particular page to see if you're using headings correctly. The next tip is to be very, very clear on the search intent. In other words, clearly understand what the user is genuinely looking for when they've entered a particular query into Google. So take a look at the current top 10 for any query that you're looking to target and understand the broad makeup of those pages. Is the copy particularly long? Is it short? What aspects is the page covering, or what aspects are many of the pages covering? Try to understand those elements and make sure that generally you don't go against the grain. Of course you want to offer more value, but you want to make sure that your page isn't too dissimilar from the current offerings on Google. AI. It's quite new, it's quite fantastic what it can already do, but don't rely on it to write most, if not all, of your copy for you. There's a number of reasons for this. Content might not be of the highest quality, it might not be original, it might be a spun version from another site, much more precise. Google has already begun to penalise sites that are heavily relying on AI. Therefore, use AI for inspiration, guidance on structure and keywords, etc., but don't rely on it to write most of your copy. And of course, keyword research should inform the copy. So there's a plethora of tools available. Here's just 4. Google Search Console, tremendous for enhancing current content, and of course completely free of charge to use. There's ChatGPT. Again, whilst we shouldn't rely on it to write all of the copy for us, it can be a tremendous ally in terms of providing keyword ideas, content structure, and guidance on aspects such as subtopics. There's tools such as Also Ask. There's a modest cost associated with this tool, but a tremendous tool it remains. And then there's tools such as Ahrefs and SEMrush. They're more sophisticated, there's a higher associated cost, but again, they have a great deal of value. And the final tip, aim to hook the reader from the onset and encourage them to continue their user journey beyond the landing page. Google wants the user's query to be satisfied. Often if a user returns to Google from your page, and indeed returns particularly quickly, this can convey a negative impression and can have a negative effect on your future rankings. Thank you very much for your time. That's it from me, and enjoy the rest of the seminar.
Well, thanks to Tom for that for that segment. I just wanted to pick up on one thing that
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm very sorry that I can't.
Sorry, Hans.
I just wanted to pick up on one thing, and I see, Claire, you've got a question. So one thing I wanted to pick up on was the H1, and I'm not sure if you aren't particularly web technical, you might not know what he's talking about. I know he described how H1 is the way that HTML codes a title, H2 would be a subtitle, H3 would be the subordinate title to level to that. But how do you use that? You probably can't use it unless your content management system, such as WordPress, is set up and that in the right way, and that will often enable you to highlight a bit of text and make that into a head H1 or an H2 or an H3. And as Tom said, you only want to use one H1 on one page. Sometimes the way that web developers set it up, they might not follow it in that order. But I think the important thing is that, you know, that there is the most important has got the lowest number, H1 or H2, and the least important has the highest number there. But yes, you're probably going to want, if it's something you want to check, you'll probably want to talk to your web developers about that in more detail. And Claire, you're asking about why Google penalizes those using AI. It's not, sorry, I'm just reading this bit. It's not that I want to use it. I'm just curious. Yeah.
So I can give a bit of
Yeah, thank you, Bella.
that's okay. So how a lot of the tools like ChatGPT function is that they pull in this data from a lot of sources and end up either sort of replicating or sometimes fabricating answers. So as Tom mentioned, I think you know, it's not always reliable to a content that it produces. And secondly, it tries to avoid the reason Google is doing this specifically is to avoid that self-duplication of content. So instead of having lots of content on those Google searches that is essentially saying the same thing, they want to keep those higher quality bits of content up at the top and prioritize those to make sure that it's high quality, original, and relevant. Hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Bella. I think that was really clear. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to writing tips and tricks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about generating ideas, because if, like me, you might struggle to know exactly what to add to each page of your website, or you feel that you need to diversify your content. So first things first, take a look at your
Teams to ask for agenda items for the 11 o'clock meeting. But
So first things first, take a look at your competitors. I know that Bella has already touched on this, but take a look at what content they're doing really well. There is no shame in looking to your peers to understand how you can improve your own website. Just make sure that you take these ideas and edit them to fit your own brand's tone of voice and values. Secondly, ask around. What is currently a trending topic, and how can you create content that can help add value to this conversation? I also recommend using AI here to help generate these engaging content ideas. For example, you can ask ChatGPT for ideas on themes that people who enjoy dance might also be interested in. Or you could ask, what are people interested in museums searching on Google? Again, just to clarify, I'm not saying to use AI to generate and write copy for you, but it can be a really helpful tool to get you started if you're suffering with the dreaded writer's block. So a couple really key writing tips here. The first one, I know, again, Tom's already touched on this, but keep it short and simple. I'm sure you all know and have heard this before, but it's probably the key tip when it comes to writing compelling copy. Did you know that users tend to only read 20% of a web page's copy? Yes, that's right, 20%. So to have the greatest chance of creating a lasting impression, make sure you keep your written content as succinct as possible and avoid using technical terms and jargon. This leads us nicely into my next tip. If users are only reading 20% of your web page's copy, then it's crucial that key information is presented early on. Make it obvious and do not let people hunt for the information they really want. The likelihood is they will become frustrated and leave your website. Next, use an active voice. Again, I'm sure you've heard this tip, but not only is an active voice more engaging, but it also has a slightly more authoritative, confident tone, which can be very effective in leading users to purchase. An example of using an active voice would be, HDK hosted a brilliant, insightful webinar, versus a passive voice, which would say, this insightful webinar was hosted by HDK. Where possible, get a second opinion. It's always best to get a second pair of eyes to check your copy, preferably a person. Proofreaders can ensure that content is relevant and useful, but also that spelling, grammar, syntax, and paragraph structures are correct. And finally, say it out loud. Sometimes it's much easier to digest how your writing comes across by speaking. Ask yourself, does it sound clear, and can anyone understand what I'm saying? So when it comes to making your copy accessible, all the tips already mentioned are going to help with this. However, here are some extra points to consider. You can use AI technology like Hemingway, which is slightly less known than something like ChatGPT, but this is really useful in highlighting where your copy structure could be improved. Make sure, again, to break down your copy into clear headers, subheadings, and short paragraphs, just so you make all of your information easier to digest. Also ensure that you use inclusive language throughout your website, and avoid excluding groups based on gender, race, etc. You can add alt text to your images so that screen reader software can pick up the content of your photographs and read it aloud. And finally, make sure that the actual font and colors of your website are readable. There is really nothing worse than web pages where you struggle to read the text due to design flaws. To finish my tips and tricks section, I thought that it would be fun to show you 2 examples of copy. One less effective version and one that works really well. To do this, I've taken copy from an arts website that I think does a brilliant job of copywriting, the Camden Arts Centre, and I've gone ahead and ruined it. Take a moment to read the paragraph here. Then, if you're able to, it would be really nice to put in the chat why you think this copy is not particularly effective. So I'll give you a few minutes, and once we've got some answers through, we can have a chat.
I think we've got some really nice answers coming in the chat. Maybe I can go through them, and Fizz, we can say our responses to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Ione is saying that it starts with passive sentence and long sentences, and something that, and Lily's also mentioned that about passive voice. And some people are talking about how it starts in the distant past and not the here and now. The information relevant to the reader isn't in that priority order that you might want to present it. You can't quickly scan through and pull out those key points, and potentially the sentences are too long and it's a bit inconsistent. So how does that all read for you, Fizz?
Yeah, you've all got the right answers here. That it's very unspecific, and it's very passive, like you said. And May's just put in the chat, they don't actually say what they do, which is kind of the biggest problem here. It's really unclear what they're trying to say. And it makes that final sentence feel really irrelevant and kind of an afterthought, because what are we trying to be inspired by?
Okay.
Any other comments, Bella, that are coming through?
No clear link around how to find them or book tickets. It's very clunky. And again, about the history starting first, instead of describing what's on offer.
All right, great.
And one extra comment just come through. Internationally, it says internationally acclaimed and renowned for its excellence. Those 2 phrases are saying sort of the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, amazing. Really great answers. So moving on to what the webpage actually looks like. So here we have the copy. If you just take a minute or 2 to read this, and you'll be able to tell it's much better. All right, so Camden Art Centre has done a fantastic job here of introducing a very, very small amount of building history, followed by immediately telling you what spaces are on the site, all within that first sentence. They then very clearly and concisely move on to tell you what is actually on offer within these spaces. So you do not have to guess as a reader during any part of this copy. You know exactly what's going on and exactly what they're trying to tell us. The use of language is very inclusive here and very obviously projects their want to, or how their organization is a warm, welcoming environment. And finally, they finish this really great about us copy with a sentence that gives an overall impression of the organization's values, which is really important. And these values should underpin all of the copy that you have throughout your website. Now on to our final section of the seminar.
So now that you've written the copy and maybe you've hit publish, what do you do after that? And we're going to talk a bit about testing and reviewing the copywriting to make sure it works for you in the future. So, as I've mentioned, the once you've done the writing, perhaps the work isn't always finished with websites. You can publish it, but there's always more work to be done and more ways to review that and use it in the future. It also you can publish a page and look at those really minute metrics and KPIs to follow the success of it. But you can also review how content is performed sort of long in the future to be able to shape your content strategy. So before hitting publish, you've followed Fiz's advice and written up your bit of content. Now it's ready to go. There's a bit of a checklist that you might want to do before you hit that publish button, which you might want to review those strategic goals and the target audience that you set out in your guidelines. Make sure that that content aligns with these elements. You can do a sense check, making sure that the clarity, coherence, and tone consistency is all there. Is your message clear? That's a really important one. Proofread for grammar and spelling errors. And there are tools that you can use online to help with this. Grammarly is one. I'm sure there's lots of them out there as well. Accessibility, make sure you're following those accessibility best practices that were mentioned by Fiz. And finally, it's the obvious one, but just if there's anyone else available in your team or in the office who's able to take a look over and get some feedback, or a friend or anyone else. A fresh pair of eyes can always catch things that you might have missed. So then testing for success. Once the content has been live on your site for some time, you have a couple options on how you want to move forward with it, if you want to do that at all. But keeping in mind that, we know that arts marketing teams are often quite limited in resource. Unless you have a big marketing team, you might not be able to pull out all the information you want to all the time. So here's a couple of tips on hopefully that are time conscious and easy to repeat. If you have a particular page or a piece of content that you'd like to track the success of, you can check back monthly and maybe weave that into your regular analytics check-in. Seeing how many page views it's getting, as well as any other metrics that are useful, such as click-throughs and time spent on page. Tools like Google Analytics are really useful for this in order to look at a particular page and those KPIs, or being able to compare and contrast the performance of a couple of pages against each other. That can be a really interesting exercise and one that I've enjoyed in the past, because sometimes the pages that are performing the best and are either getting the most views or the people are staying on the longest are not always the ones you'd expect. So they can give you a bit of an indication on why your visitors are coming to your site in the first place. For example, if you're an organization that runs a couple of different venues and one venue is leading the pack and getting a lot more views than others, you can then take that information forward by catering a bit more content towards that venue on your site, or flagging it maybe in a more prominent position, like on your homepage. But you can work with this as you see fit in your organization, in your website. So looking at metrics, time on page and bounce rate are really useful to see if your content is relevant to your audience. And I think Tom mentioned that a bit in SEO, but it's really nice, really important to keep people looking at your site and keep people reading down that page. And that's a bit in contrast to what Fiz has said about the 20% rule, that people only read the top sort of fifth of a page. But the longer you can keep them going down, the better it is, not only for, digital performance and those key metrics that you want to present, but also just in general, it's nice to keep your audience engaged. And it's a really nice way to prove that. For example, if people are clicking through to a particular blog post, but that they're leaving that blog post pretty quickly, what you might gather from that is that the content and the topic is really interesting. Sorry, not the content, the topic's really interesting and they want to learn more about it, but actually the way that you've presented that information on the blog is not as relevant or not as useful as it could be. So you might want to go in and relook and reshape that copywriting. There are also tools like Hotjar, which let you visualize that data and imagine real user journeys, seeing where people click through most often. I think they have a free option, so that's a nice one to look at. Finally, as a bigger project to look at, you might want to do a bit more of a comprehensive and qualitative review of your website through audience surveys or feedback. And that might be, if you're thinking of revamping your website in any way, what are the really important things for you to look at? And doing that in a way that isn't just your team saying it, it's really your audience. You could consider bringing together a small group of your target audience and sharing a short survey to discuss how they experienced your website. Potentially questions like what pages they visited in those first few minutes, what were the most grabbing and relevant to them, what's the most useful content for them on the site, but also what are they missing and what might be confusing for them. So finally, once that's all done and you've tested your content as you like, you can look to the future. And we've looked at how your copy can change based on that testing. But that's not to mention the changes that come naturally through your organizational journey. And your website can be a living beast that's in constant evolution alongside your organization's activities, needs, strategy, and audiences. And that's not meant to be scary. That's meant to be quite a positive thing about, once you've made your website, it's not a static thing and you can constantly be redeveloping that. If you are ever wanting a change and your website feels a bit stale, but you don't want to do a big redesign, you're happy with the branding and the logo, or, perhaps there just isn't the budget for that at this time. Often your copy is the easiest way to refresh and revitalize the website. And sometimes it can even be the copy that's feeling a bit stale in the first place. So have a play around with that. So to recap, your website is in constant evolution, doesn't need to be static. Use that content on your site to the best of your ability by testing where you can and being iterative. Perhaps you can schedule regular content audits to kind of review those metrics and also just have a little review of your site kind of just by reading it, making sure that your copy remains current and effective, and highlight a few key areas for yourself to look at so that those regular reviews don't seem overwhelming. And of course, as your organization and audiences grow and develop, creating that new content and updating your copy can help you stay aligned with those goals. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bella. And thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to a discussion in just a few moments. We've got a few, just a couple of housekeeping that we always do at this point. But I sense that with the just looking at the interaction on that last exercise, hopefully there's a lot of experience in the room that maybe are happy to share that with other people in the discussion as well. So please stick around for that. As I mentioned, we've got webinars set on our set for the next year ahead. The next one next month is on advanced search. So advanced search on your website and improving the user experience and website engagement. In September, we have got something on culture segments. We've got the audience agency joining us live in our webinar, and we're going to be talking about how you refine your website user journeys. And then we've got one in October about accessibility for short-form social media landscape. We've done accessibility for websites before on a couple of occasions, but we're really going to focus on short-form social media content for this one. So that will be really interesting. If you aren't on our quarterly newsletter, we send it out every 3 months or so, we have a roundup of, as it says here, marketing tips, industry insights, case studies, those sorts of things. So if you're interested in these kinds of topics, you can be updated on more of that in our quarterly newsletter. And the link to is just gone whiz past. Also, there's an email address, hello@wearehdk.com. Obviously, Tom couldn't be here, but if you've got any SEO queries, if you want SEO audits of your own website, or if you just have any question for HDK, that is a good email address to use. It will go to the team, and the right person can pick that up and respond to you. So that's the housekeeping. We've got some minutes left for a discussion. I wonder if anyone's got any more questions about copywriting, or if they've got your own tips or things that you live your life by when you're writing copy. Is there something that you're happy to share with the team? It'd be great if you're up for that, to switch your camera on and put something in the chat, and then we'll call you up if you're happy to share that experience, or if you've got a question. Right, I can see one question coming in from Lily. We'll just read that and digest that. I can see other questions starting to come in. So I'll just give a few seconds for that, and then maybe between Bella, Fiz, and myself, we can start to give some responses. But equally, if you feel that you're happy to answer those yourself, it'd be great to get some other voices in the room as well. So I've got a very nice, simple question from Tara, saying, I'll just read these two out to give us some sort of time to get our thoughts together. I can see that Tara's asked, how important is it to keep sentences short? So that's a good question. And then I can see that Lily has asked, I'm going to read this out, if you provide information via video content, is it good practice useful to also include text and copy that supports what is explored in the video, or is there no need to replicate info? Does captioning factor into what text is pulled into SEO? So these are great SEO questions. I'll start answering that, and Bella and Fiz, if you're happy to sort of follow up if you've got anything to add. But the simple answer to that is yes. I think a lot of that, especially the video, the talking about what content is in the SEO is good for accessibility, of course, for one reason, and it also helps with the SEO is a second reason. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's Lily's question is interesting. I think yes, basically adding that text alongside the video, whether it's a caption transcript or just the key points that you're sharing in your video, that can be nice and helpful to make sure that you're hitting those keywords. Does captioning factor into what text is pulled into SEO? That's a really interesting one, which I believe so. I believe that the search engines can index that captioning, but that's something that we can pass on to Tom and get back to you with a direct answer on. And Tara's question, how important is it to keep sentences short? It's like what Hans has said. Yes, it's important. You want it to be readable, and I think Fiz mentioned reading it out loud is really helpful. And if you're naturally pausing at certain times in a text, if you've got a sentence that's 3 lines long, you might want to see how to break that up. But equally, it's as we mentioned in that strategy and audiences section, it's about who you're talking to, and if your audiences are going to expect that longer, more dense copy, it can be fine to do that, but just play with it as works for you. And again, depends on your tone of voice. And in terms of accessibility, though, it's usually a good idea.
Brilliant, thank you, Bella. And Eva's asked, I like this question. What do you think of using humor in your copy? Would it hold the attention of the user more than it would normally? So I think there's a gut reaction answer to this. I love it when there is humor in it, but I think it is important as well to think about how it works with your brand. I think it's going to work better with some brands and less so with others. But what it certainly does, it helps to humanize you and hopefully make a good connection, and also sort of help you to stand out and help you to be memorable. I mean, we feel good when we read something that makes that's humorous, particularly when you get. But it is, I guess, the other point is that it's possible to get humor wrong sometimes. You've got to be aware of that, and it's possible that you might not quite. There's the risk of obscuring the information that you're trying to get over because you're sort of focused on the humor. So I would say it's a great tool to use in the right situations.
I would completely agree with Hans there. I love a good play on words, and I love reading stuff that is very personalized and quite funny. But like he said, just be very careful. Make sure that you definitely get a second opinion on any humor to make sure that it lands correctly. And again, make sure that it is really something that aligns with the organization that you're writing for.
Right. Well, we've got one more question just coming in, it's Mackenzie, I think. Any ideas whether social platforms also penalize AI generated copy, for example, in captions? That is a question I personally don't have much knowledge on. It's certainly something we can follow up.
This is actually quite an interesting question, because very recently Instagram published new guidelines saying they were trying to crack down on the idea of duplicated content. So potentially that could also include AI generated copy within captions. So I would say that it's probably best, if you can, to avoid it. It's just best practice too, but definitely use it to help generate ideas, come up with fun social media copy. I don't know if Bella, you have any more insight into that?
No, that's yeah, I think that's all great.
I see another question. I'm just quickly looking through our yeah, great. Where did I see it? Was it something about the difference? Oh yeah, this was Lily, wasn't it? What's the difference between writing copy for websites and how you'd write for social media? So the thing I'm going to plug there, I'm not going to answer that question straight away. But what I am going to do is it's an opportunity for me to remind you that we have all of our webinars recordings on our website. So there's, I think I counted this morning, there's 37 recorded webinars over the last few years, and of which one of them, if you go back, is about copywriting for your organization's social media. So we've done a whole session on that. We did that back in June 2023, so it's just over a year old. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly have a look back at that webinar. We've got that on the website for you to browse as well.
I might pass that over to Fizz to answer, if you have any extra thoughts.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in terms of setting yourself up to write copy for social media, largely stays the same. You know, work out the audience, work out your brand tone of voice and your values, and make sure that these are consistent throughout your social media copy. When it comes to the actual content of social media copy, the way that I would recommend structuring it very much remains the same throughout. I think that you need to develop copy that is shorter, obviously, than website copy. I think most of us, we know that when we're on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, we actually read very little because they're so visually driven. So make sure that your content is very short and it gets to the point straight away. And then I would also recommend at the end of whatever copy you've written to always have a call to action. So if you are, obviously this depends on what you're posting, but if you are an arts organization with a website and you want to pull people to buy tickets for whatever show you're hosting, at the end of your copy, I would always say, click the link in our bio to find out more, something along those lines. But obviously it's really dependent on what you're writing.
Great, thank you, Fizz. That's a great answer. I think we've got time for one more question, and I can see that from Sharon. So I'm going to have a go at starting to answer that question, and then we'll wrap up to keep us within the time. And Sharon asks, is there customer issues to reposting and amending web pages over leaving old info, or do customers appreciate updates? Is there customer issues to reposting and amending web pages over leaving old info, or do customers appreciate updates? Got it. Okay. So things that immediately come to mind is, again, it's just seeing thinking about your own experience here, really, and putting your own, putting yourself in that position and thinking of when you've been frustrated or when you've been impressed. I think personally, websites that are updated and have that updated information, they're going to enhance that trust that you have, and they're going to make you feel that, give that sense of reliability as well, I guess. And I think that, but the opposite of that, I always like to see it from both sides, is that too many changes can often lead to confusion as well. So getting that balance of how often you update it and being it clear. Sometimes you see websites where they document the changes that they've made. It depends on the context, the type of website it is, and what content you're talking about. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts, I think, on that one.
I'd probably just add one extra thing, because that all was great, but that it depends on the page itself as well. So if it's something like a blog, if it was, say, a news item that came out in sort of 2020 or 2021, and the information was relevant for that time, audiences might be able to work out contextually that that information might have changed in the last few years, and it's useful as an archive. Whereas for a blog post that you want to update with some new information that you found or that might be relevant, sometimes it can be useful to yeah, as Hans has mentioned, update that and keep it reliable and relevant and really hitting those keywords. And I think sometimes in different content management systems, you can sort of change the date to push that to the top if you want it to look like it's a new piece of content in a blog. So yeah, and if whereas if it's, for example, an about page or a more general sort of pillar page, then you'll, I think usually what we'd say is just go ahead and update that as long as you've prepared the content and you've got it ready to go. No need to sort of duplicate and say when those changes were made.
Right. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Fiz. Thanks to Tom when he watches this recording. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We love your interactions. Thank you for being, it keeps us going as well. So we really appreciate that, and your questions and your participation in the interactions earlier on as well. So thank you. And I really hope that we'll see you at future webinars, and have a good day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.